Hi guys, this is the Forgetful Scholar and let's chat about books. So this week, let's see, it's going to be Candy Coated, Bait, and Confused Archeologist. Yeah. So I have to say this week was mostly a bit disappointing, but we'll go into it one by one. Okay, so the first book is going to be The Terrible Personal Shopper by Laura Burton. Okay, so there we go. That's the book. And this is the candy coated one. It's FM Contemporary. Now the thing with this one is, it was very upfront that it's very PG-13, kind of wholesome, fade to black romance. There's no smut in it, and that's fine. There's been other books, the Magic in Manhattan series that I absolutely loved, and that is very fade to black, So, and I thought I needed a little bit of a change of pace. Been reading a lot of like romance with a dash of murder or romance with some kind of horror in it. So I figured maybe this would be nice to kind of clean my palette. And personally, I was like, oh, where's the murder? Where's the monsters? So obviously, I wasn't down for cleaning my palette, I guess. I don't know. So this one is very Hallmarky. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just sort of that's kind of the world the story kind of is like. It's very sweet and quaint and, things like that. I will say that as Hallmark movies go, this definitely does have a younger voice to it, So Hallmark, hey, hit her up. I don't know if you guys want to do that, but get some new movies in there, right? So this follows Leah, who is like, oh my god, so crazy and so klutzy, and she can't hold down a job. She's just so quirky. Can you tell that she annoys the shit out of me? If you can, you're starting to get me. There you go. It was just too cartoony. I'm very klutzy myself. And when you're super klutzy, you just kind of learn to laugh at it, But it was just too much. It's like she gets fired and like, it's okay because a brownie makes me feel better. It was just like this weird kind of thing. And it could be the author's trademark signature, and that's fine. I just didn't personally jive with it. She keeps getting fired from jobs because she's super klutzy. She lives in New York. And a lot of this was like, because she's like, oh, I need $300 for my rent. And I was like, why? You live in New York. $300? Do you live with 12 other people? Because that's not enough. With 12 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment? Because that's not enough, honey. But anyway, so her old friend is stuck in the airport and she needs her to go to an appointment for a new client, and her old friend is a personal shopper. So she's like, okay. And in this book, there obviously is a big universe this author has created, and obviously in this book you revisit a lot of past characters in different books. So if you're a fan of hers, this is great because you get a catch up on a lot of the other storylines that obviously she has out there or is going to produce, and that's cool. That was done in a way that I didn't think it was annoying. Because that happens, because some books it's all about those secondary characters, but this one wasn't. So that's good. So she goes to measure Blaze, who's an A-list movie star, and we know this because he tells us internally many, many times. So basically, he's telling himself internally that he's an A-lister star many, many times. That's not really, you can say it once, and then especially since there's a scene later on with the paparazzi, we get it, that's okay, you don't have to, alright, cool. Obviously she doesn't have any idea what she's doing, but he finds her charming and adorable, and there's this whole bet with his friend going on, so he's just like, come on tour with me, she says yes, and he's like, I'll pay you $25,000. And she's like, great. And then she starts daydreaming about all those things she's going to do with that money. And I'm like, honey, that's your rent for like 2 months. You live in New York. Like, what are you acting like you could buy a yacht with that? That's not. Oh. And the thing is, what I didn't particularly care for is that you get both of the MC's POVs. And on the top of the chapter has their name on it. And if it wasn't for that name and the gender pronouns, I would have been confused who was thinking when. They just kind of had the same internal thought process, which was a little, I was like, wait, who are we talking about? Oh, it's the guy. Okay, okay. Oh, it's the girl. Okay, okay. So that was a little, you know, um, and it's just, there was a lot of borderline telling, not showing. It wasn't a huge, it was a lot of that, but there was that in there quite a bit. And I'm like, because he's like, oh, everyone thinks that me, The Rock, and Jason Momoa work out together because we all have the same type of body. He's thinking this internally to himself when he's having drinks with his friend. When they're talking about the personal shopper thing, and it would have been so easy for his friend to be like, oh yeah, that's smart to get a personal shopper. I bet Jason Momoa and Dwayne Johnson need that too, because, like you can't just find that size in a department store. So, like, there is a difference between, like, a secondary character making that commentary to the MC as opposed to the MC thinking it themselves. And I know that seems like such a fine line, but it really does work to push the story forward in a sort of show not tell motif instead of the other way around. I know it seems like such a little thing, but it is such a little thing to change to make your story really good. And this author obviously has a lot of fans, obviously has a lot of books to their name. And this was a really sweet story, and it was basically about a romance. It was very wholesome, very candy coated, like I said. Not particularly my taste. Not particularly my taste. And that's fine. That's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinions and stuff like that. I did like that she, decided to go slow, so they actually had to get to know each other. So that, it was nice. Even though he was like insta lust, she's like, no, no, no. So that's cool. That's a different take on it and everything like that. I did find that they didn't seem to be able to make decisions for themselves. Like, internally, she's always thinking about what her two sisters, who are like totally opposite, would think about a decision. And I'm like, honey, I have two siblings myself that are very different in personalities, but I don't think about what they would do when I have to make a decision for me. That just seems a very immature kind of mentality to it. So I was just like, okay, all right. At the end, both of the MCs are told what to do from other people to get to the happy ending. Like, he's told by somebody to go after her, a little bit of spoiler, and she's told by her sister to accept. Like, they actually don't make these conscious choices. And I was just like, well, that's a way to go for it. And I say this with my heart filled with sarcasm. That's healthy. And then the antagonist. Now, for me, I don't think any kind of genre, I don't think this story is any good if it's not doesn't have a good antagonist. If you have an antagonist in the story, please make them good, because it's just gonna make your story so much better. And the thing is, with this one, they just woke up and chose violence. Like, there was no reason given, or maybe I didn't see it, but there's no reason given to why they were a bitch. And a bitch they were. Were they jealous? Were they jealous? Did they want one of the MCs for themselves? No, there was really no indication of that. And I thought it would have been really interesting because basically they want to rip them apart just because why not? And I thought it'd be interesting if the antagonist was like friends with Blaze, because they are an actor as well in the industry. And because on paper, Leah does seem like a clout chaser and a gold digger. On paper, we know she's not. We know that she's a sweet little bean from her point of view. We know that, but outside, it could look like that easily. So what if they were Blaze's friend, and the name Blaze, Jesus, Blaze's friend, and was like, and had a past where their heart was broken because someone they really loved was just after clout and just after money, and they were trying to protect him, but going about it in a really bad way. I think that would have been a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic, add a little bit more teeth to the story, if I will, there was a lot of plot devices that I've seen, like, in teen movies. So if you're a teen interested in kind of a wholesome romance, or if you have a teen that wants to read romance, you want them to be more wholesome, this would be a really good author to send them to, because it kind of seemed more geared towards that. Um, so that was for that. So I'll really give it 2 stars. And again, I'm not like knocking them down stars because there was no smut. It advertised it was no smut. I went into it for wholesome. I'm just knocking it down because it really felt like a unicorn vomited in the story. It was just too sweet, too over the top. Half the time I was like, did she just like snort pixie sticks? What's happening? So her personality was just a little too, like, it would have been better if maybe dialed down to maybe a 7 on the peppy, everything is wonderful, everything is rainbows kind of attitude, instead of seemed like a 14. It was just a little too much for me. So for me, it's a 2-star. I just, and again, if this is your kind of thing, go for it. Cool, it just wasn't mine. So next is an MM fantasy, contemporary, urban fantasy. How many times do I want to say fantasy? Apparently it's a couple more. Twisted Pretty Things, Shadows of London, Book 1. Ariana Nash, sorry. Woo. Okay, so that's a really cool cover. And when I looked this up on Amazon, I typed in romance novels, and this came up. So it was under the romance novel tag. Now, the thing with this one is there's like another title that only comes up on the Kindle pages. It says Twisted Pretty Things, and MM Urban Fantasy, Shadows of London, Book 1. So I don't know if you could like really tiny over there. That should have warned me. It should have been a red flag. But I was so drawn in by this beautiful cover, because honestly it's gorgeous, and it reminded me of Gambit. And like, Gambit from the X-Men has always been my favorite, and I was just so excited to read this, and so very disappointed. So this one is the bait one. Now, this one really pissed me off, for lack of a better term. So let's get into that. Again, I searched under romance novels, and this came up. So in Amazon, it's tagged as a romance novel. If that's incorrect, then no hate. It's a really good urban fantasy, because it really is a really good urban fantasy, but it is a shit romance novel, because genres have different things that push the stories along. They have different story points. That's what it is. That's why they're different genres. So for urban fantasy, the world was compelling. The powers were super interesting. The sub boss did not shock me. It did come off like it's supposed to be like, oh, isn't that a twist? It wasn't. And there was no clues to look back on and be like, oh damn, I missed the clues. There was nothing like that. It just popped up. But the Uber boss is fascinating. It is doing something, drives me nuts. And this is a very fantasy trope, not a romance trope. Fantasy trope. Cassandra Clare does this. Sarah J. Maas does it. L.J. Smith does it. The author for The Six of Crows, they did it for the one on Netflix. You know what I mean? The Cross and Skull and Bone or something. Is the love triangle. Romance novels don't do that, because in romance novels, when the two MCs meet, it's soulmates. Now, it's not always love at first sight. A lot of times it's hate at first sight, or childhood best friends that grow together, but they're each other's lobster. And yes, if you get that Friends reference, you are amazing. So let's keep going. Their lobster or their soulmate. You know what I mean? They are the ones that are supposed to be together. In fantasy, they do the love triangle a lot. And those, the ones I mentioned, really do like YA fantasy or new adult fantasy. I'm not sure what Sarah J. Maas's, what her titles would be, like her titles for her books, like her hash, you know what I mean. Categories. I don't know what her just fantasy, right? I mean, I keep thinking like fairy dick, but no, it's fantasy. Not romance, because it always happens this way. And I was really disappointed because I love Gambit, and the cover made me think of Gambit, and I hoped it would have been kind of Gambit. Dom, who's the MC, and we get his point of view all the time, does not have the personality of Gambit. He's not this kind of laissez-faire, lovable rogue. He's kind of serious. You don't really get a huge kind of take on who he is. There are some points where he has like fun friend moments with his coworker. Those are really sweet. Um, and it's basically a love affair between like a triangle like him, this guy named Hollywood that he's not sure if he's a bad guy or not, but has saved him multiple times and has been emotionally vulnerable with him, and they've bonded over past traumas. Like they share stuff. And spoiler, they have sex in this book. So following this fucking fantasy triangle bullshit that I hate, that means this possible healthy relationship is not the one he's going to end up with. Because that's what happens. And his boss man, who he's worked for 2 years, who's basically borderline gaslighted him, used him as bait without him knowing, by the way, and it bought him from the government, again, without Dom knowing. And there's a few times he showed a little bit of humanity. One time he willingly shared a secret, but most times kept him far in the dark. And because of that, that's the asshole he's going to end up with, because that's how it goes in these stupid trips. They're not going to end up with the one that they can have a healthy relationship with. They always end up with the one that is borderline emotionally abusive, because, I don't know, they think it's edgy or something. I don't know why that always seems to do that. If that's not how it ends, because this is a book 1 of 3, I believe, then I sincerely apologize. And good for you for actually turning a shitty subplot line into actually maybe possibly an interesting one, because that always drives me nuts. Because the second book, the MC is always like they can't choose between the two, so it makes the MC seem like an animal in heat as opposed to finding true love. You know what I mean? Again, where a fantasy difference from romance novels. Romance novels, they might have subplots like mysteries or horror or something like that, but the main plot are the people. You get the people and the romance, the soulmates, the true loves. That's why romance is such a steady selling genre. You know what I mean? Because people like that. So you get a glimpse, if it's a good romance, you get the sense of these people and you want them to have happy endings. This, you kind of a little bit get Dom's personality, but there's so much chaos going on and he's so reactive to what's going on. Sometimes I wonder if he actually is a trained soldier and a trained agent, because he's just like all over the place. He didn't pick up any kind of clues. All this is going on. Madness is going on. You know, you get a little bit of emotion, that he has more emotion for Hollywood, the one that he sleeps with throughout the books. But again, if this follows a typical trope, Hollywood's going to be an asshole, and he's going to end up with the asshole because he's the good guy. Like, it drives me nuts. Again, apologize if that's not the way it goes. Good for you, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it's going to go. Man, this one really made me so angry. And I mean, Dom's just not that interesting. The mystery of the big boss is kind of interesting. The world is interesting. So if you're looking for an MM urban fantasy book, this is great. This would be like a solid 3, super interesting. If you're looking for an MM fantasy type romance, no, this is a 2. Don't even bother. It's a 1, really. If you're going straight for romance, it's a 1. Don't even bother. So to be fair, I split it down the middle and I'm giving it 2 stars, because as a fantasy, it's pretty good. As a romance novel, it's pretty shit. So divide the difference. It's a 2-star. Have fun. I don't want to, again, if it actually is interesting when it comes to the online, cool, good for you, but I'm not gonna read it. It just disappointed me so hard. I hate that triangle trope. It is so annoying, especially when they always end up with the shitty person. Like, okay, sorry. Well, except for L.J. Smith and Cassandra Clare, I think they handled their tropes really well. And for L.J. Smith, the Secret Circle one, she ends up with the good guy. In the books, Vampire Diary, it's a really interesting way to end that. triangle, and the Clockwork Angel one, that was a really mature way to handle the love triangle too. So not all of them do that, I have to say. It just seems right now the kind of Sarah J. Maas way of doing it seems to be what everyone's doing, and it's like, no, you don't have to do that. This is your book. You know what I mean? You can do whatever you want with it. Oh, sorry. Got so worked up. Okay, so this one is The Confused Archaeologist, and it's K.J. Charles, Spectre Island, Green Men, Book 1. Now, this is a really pretty cool cover, too. Now, this one, I read this author before, and I didn't particularly like their style, but I was so interested in the synopsis, I had to give it a try. And I'm happy I did. I really, really enjoyed this. This is Saul and Randolph. So, Saul is an archaeologist. So, this takes place after World War I, and he's an archaeologist that is basically disgraced. And I don't want to give anything away because it's a good backstory moment when you find out what happened. And he works for this eccentric billionaire. I'm assuming he's billionaire because that's how they're eccentric, right? Because if they're not billionaires, they're just freaking crazy, right? Anyway, it takes place in London, and the eccentric boss really likes occult things. So he sends Saul out to research and look up things to see if the cult stuff is right and everything like that. Meanwhile, Randolph works for the Green Men, and this is like a generational thing, and he calls himself an occultist. Excuse me. And he works for the Ghost Hunter, and two really interesting men that I really would love their story. Max and Barney, I really would love their story. They're fascinating. Anyway, to protect London from like ghosts and ghouls and things like that. Now, there's an interesting plot where the government's trying to take control, and that was really fascinating. I love that. I really love the world in this. I really loved the magic system in this. Randolph and Saul, see, the thing I didn't like about the Magpie Lord, personality-wise, I didn't really jive with the main characters. And again, romance novels, all about the main characters. This one, it was a little bit better. I generally did find myself kind of laughing at their more snarky, bitchy moments. So it was a little bit better. And the world was much more interesting. And I really, really like this one. So I'm happy I gave this a try. I do think that sometimes during the romancing, this author tends to be really generous with like the dialogue that kind of slows the pacing of, better word for it, the smut scenes down a little bit. And I'm like, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit because everything else pacing was so dynamic and interesting, and then this year you're really slowing it down where this could be a really like fun, kind of fast and fun kind of moment. So those moments I didn't really care for. I felt they kind of were counterintuitive to the overall pacing of the author was doing. And there was one part where like, I would say like, I'm saying like again, like a lot, like. There was one part where they were in a precarious situation, and you don't really see how that ends up. You see the part where like Saul passes out, and then Saul wakes up a couple days later. You don't really see in between. That I was kind of disappointed about, so that was a little disappointing. But I'm really interested to see where book 2 goes for that, so that's really cool. And considering the other 2 books this week, this one was like a star, and I kind of wanted to give it 4 stars, but then I had to be like, am I giving it 4 stars because of the one book this week I enjoyed? Or am I giving this 4 stars because I really think it deserves 4 stars? So in my opinion, I had to pull back a little bit. So it's definitely a 3 stars. I enjoyed it. Some parts I thought it was counterintuitive to the pacing, but a marked improvement from how I felt about the author's other book. So I'm really excited about that. I'm real excited about that. My goodness. And this is an MM historical paranormal book. Hey, what a week. Kind of disappointing. So thank you, Green Man. Book 1, you kind of brought it up a little bit. Oof. Anyway, so I don't want to, but it's time for me to get back to the real world. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you later.